You don't remember the first time it happened. Not clearly. All you remember is the silence afterward. Not peace, not understanding, just that echoing kind of silence that fills the room when you've just been made to doubt yourself. And he didn't yell, that's the trick. He didn't even raise his voice. He just dismantled you, one small twist of the narrative at a time, until you were no longer arguing about what happened, you were defending your sanity. And that's the part you can't explain to anyone, because on paper it sounds like a conversation, but inside your body it felt like a betrayal, like the walls of your own mind turned against you. And if you're being honest, you've started to feel like maybe you are the one who's overreacting, too emotional, too sensitive, too much. Isn't that what he said? But that thought, that tiny planted seed of doubt, is the weapon. And Freud would have called it what it is, a manipulation of reality itself, a defense mechanism turned into a sword. Because when a man distorts the truth, not to protect you but to protect his image of himself, what you're witnessing isn't conflict. It's the unconscious mind going to war. Freud didn't believe we argued for the truth. He believed we argued to protect the illusion of control. And when a man, in the middle of an argument, starts to rewrite the past, shift blame, mock your memory, or question your mental state, he's not just trying to win. He's defending his ego from annihilation. See, the ego in Freud's theory is fragile. It stands between the raw instinct of the id, the part of us that wants, needs, and devours, and the rigid morality of the superego, the part that punishes us with shame and guilt. So when he feels cornered, not physically, but emotionally, he doesn't lash out because of what you said. He lashes out because what you said touches a wound he spent years trying not to feel. But instead of facing it, he weaponizes confusion, gaslighting, a word so overused that we forget what it actually feels like, that slow erosion of certainty, that constant recalibration of your emotional compass, that numb, empty ache in your gut when you start rehearsing every word you say before you speak it, because somehow every argument ends with you apologizing. Every disagreement morphs into a character trial, not about what happened, but about who you are. And here's the part no one tells you: this doesn't always start with a scream. It starts with a sigh, a look, a patronizing smile. You're remembering it wrong. That's not what I said. You always twist things. Subtle, smooth, calm, like a surgeon with a scalpel, not cutting your skin but slicing into your sense of self. Freud called it reaction formation, when a person feels something deeply unacceptable and flips it into its opposite. He doesn't want to admit he's afraid, so he becomes cruel. He doesn't want to admit he's guilty, so he accuses you. He doesn't want to admit he's ashamed, so he makes you feel like the problem. Because if you're unstable, he doesn't have to look at the part of himself that feels utterly powerless. And that is the truth behind these arguments. They are not debates. They are rituals. Rituals where the unconscious mind performs its dance. Protect the ego at all costs, even if it means distorting love into a courtroom, even if it means dragging your vulnerability into the spotlight and turning it into evidence. You want to know the most dangerous part? It feels familiar. You've been here before, long before him. Maybe it was a parent who made you second-guess your memories. Maybe it was a teacher who dismissed your feelings as dramatic. Maybe it was a friend who always needed to be right, even if it meant gaslighting your pain. So your nervous system has been trained to seek clarity from the very people who obscure it. And that's not love. That's repetition compulsion. You don't crave him. You crave the fantasy of finally being believed. But every argument with him isn't a step closer to that. It's a spiral, a loop, a psychological reenactment of not being heard. So ask yourself this: why do you stay when the price of being seen is always being punished? What part of you still believes that if you just explain it better, stay calmer, be more patient, you'll finally be understood? What if I told you you woe? What if I told you that some arguments aren't miscommunications? They are power plays masquerading as confusion. He's not misunderstanding you. He's rewriting you. One phrase at a time, one doubt at a time, until your identity becomes a story he controls. And that is not a relationship. That is a psychological occupation. But you tell yourself, it's not always like this. And that's true because he knows how to be kind. He knows exactly how to sound when he wants to keep you. The soft voice after the storm. The "I didn't mean it like that." The almost tears when he realizes he pushed too far. And for a moment you breathe. Not because it's over, but because he gave you just enough warmth to confuse survival for safety. Freud wrote that the unconscious is timeless. It doesn't distinguish between past and present. So when someone reminds you of an early pain, you don't see a red flag, you see home, even if home was a war zone. And in arguments, he brings that feeling back. The tension, the walking on eggshells, the invisible checklist in your head. Did I say too much? Did I trigger him? Should I just let it go? And so you shrink, you contort, you become less, just to avoid waking the volcano in him. But here's what you haven't admitted out loud. You're not arguing with him, you're arguing with hope. Hope that this time will be different. Hope that he's not like the last one. Hope that if you just love him right, he'll stop making you feel so crazy. And that hope, it's not romantic. It's repressed fear in disguise. You fear being alone more than being disrespected. You fear starting over more than staying in circles. You fear what it would mean to admit that this is not love. And he knows that. Maybe not consciously, but deep down in the part of him Freud would call the unconscious mind, he senses exactly how far he can push. Because he's not just manipulating you. He's manipulating his own shame, the part of him that refuses to be wrong, the part that cannot tolerate weakness. So instead of owning his guilt, he infects you with it. Like a virus passed through words, through tone, through silence. Because if he can make you question yourself, then he never has to look in the mirror. This isn't love. This is emotional displacement. It's a defense, projecting his own discomfort onto you so he can breathe easier while you suffocate. And Freud was clear about this. The more we repress, the more it returns, distorted, toxic, and dangerous. So when a man refuses to own his shadow, he doesn't become a saint. He becomes a saboteur, not out of malice, but because his inner world is a battlefield of denial. He's been taught that masculinity means never admitting pain, that vulnerability equals weakness. That saying, "I was wrong," is a threat to identity. So instead, he turns pain into strategy. He turns fear into dominance. He turns arguments into mind games. And if you dare to call it out, he flips the script. "You're so dramatic. You're too emotional. Why do you always turn everything into a problem?" Do you hear it? Every one of those statements is a smokescreen, a way to avoid responsibility, a way to erase the conversation by making you the issue. But beneath it all, behind the calm face, the practiced tone, the reasonable rebuttals, is a terrified little boy who never learned how to sit with shame. So he does what Freud said the ego must do to survive. It deflects, it denies, it destroys. And if you stay, you will become fluent in that language. You'll find yourself apologizing for being hurt. You'll find yourself explaining basic decency to a grown man. You'll start narrating your own emotions out loud just to make sure you're not too much. But the more you explain, the less he hears. Because the argument isn't about the dishes. It's not about the tone. It's not even about you. It's about his refusal to meet his own reflection. And that is not something you can fix. You were not made to be his therapist. You were not made to be a mirror. You were made to be seen. So the question becomes, how long will you let your nervous system negotiate with someone who feeds on your doubt? How long will you keep handing him the benefit of the doubt when all he's given you is the burden of it? How long will you keep shrinking just to fit inside his denial? And what happens to a woman who keeps swallowing her truth just to avoid another argument? She disappears, not all at once, not dramatically, but piece by piece. And by the time she realizes it, the silence feels safer than the truth. But you're not here because you want safety. You're here because something inside you is screaming, "This is not love." There's a moment, quiet, sharp, unholy, when your body reacts before your brain does. His voice gets louder. Your chest tightens. You feel the heat behind your eyes and you don't know why, but suddenly you're back in your childhood bedroom being yelled at for talking back, for having a tone, for existing in a way that made someone else uncomfortable. That's what he's triggering. Not just anger, memory. Unconscious, buried, but not gone. And Freud was right. What the conscious mind forgets, the body remembers. And in that moment, you're no longer arguing with a boyfriend. You're reliving every time you were punished for having a voice. You want to scream, but you've been trained to whisper. You want to walk away, but you've been conditioned to stay and soothe. You want to be understood, but he's already decided who you are. He doesn't see you. He sees the version of you that justifies his control. The crazy one, the too sensitive one, the overreacting one. And if he can reduce you to a caricature, he doesn't have to face what he's done. This isn't just emotional abuse, it's psychological rewriting, a slow, systematic warping of your perception until even your truth starts to feel like a lie. And the cruelest part, sometimes he's nice, sometimes he's gentle, sometimes he holds you while you cry from the pain he caused. And so your brain stays confused, because abuse doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes with blankets and dinners and "I love you." But it's not love if it only feels safe when he's in a good mood. It's not love if he can break you in one breath and bandage you in the next. Freud described something called repetition compulsion. You don't need the textbook, you've lived it. It's that thing you do where you keep choosing people who treat you like someone you once loved, but who couldn't love you right. So you keep playing out the same story, hoping for a different ending, but it never changes. Because this isn't about fixing him, it's about finding your wound. The one you buried so deep that you confused pain with familiarity, control with safety, shame with intimacy. And when he argues with you, really argues, it's not about solving anything. It's about reasserting power. Because in his world, power is safety, and control is love. He doesn't want resolution, he wants to win. So he keeps the argument going until you're not even sure what you were upset about in the first place. That's not a debate, that's a mind maze. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to remember what truth even feels like. But deep down, something in you knows that love shouldn't feel like self-abandonment, knows that peace shouldn't come at the cost of your identity, knows that no argument should end with you apologizing for asking to be spoken to with basic human decency. So here's the raw truth. If he raises his voice when you raise a concern, if he twists your words when you finally speak your mind, if he makes you doubt your memory, your tone, your reality, leave. Not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long in the wrong direction. Strength isn't staying. Strength is walking out before your soul learns to live on scraps. And yes, it will be hard. You will second-guess everything. You'll remember the good moments and wonder if you were the problem. But then in the silence that follows him, you'll hear it. Your voice, clear, unfiltered, untouched by shame. And you'll realize you were never too much. You were too aware, and he hated that. You think it ends when you leave, but it doesn't. That voice, his voice, will echo in your mind for weeks, months, maybe even years. You'll start an argument with yourself in your own head just to defend yourself from someone who isn't even in the room anymore. That's what psychological trauma does. It builds a version of him inside of you so he doesn't even need to be present to silence you. Freud called this introjection, when the voice of the abuser becomes your own inner critic. And long after he's gone, you'll still hear it. You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. Maybe you shouldn't have said anything at all. But here's the truth that your trauma doesn't want you to know. That voice isn't yours. It was planted. And like any parasite, it thrives on doubt. So how do you kill it? Not by yelling back. Not by pretending it doesn't exist. but by doing the thing it fears most, telling the truth, even when your voice shakes, even when your hands tremble, even when there's no one clapping for your bravery but yourself. You tell the truth. You say, "No, I'm not too sensitive. You were too cruel." You say, "No, I'm not confusing things. You were confusing on purpose." You say, "No, I'm not hard to love. I was just in love with someone who made love conditional." And then you stop defending your hurt, and you start honoring it because you weren't broken. You were bent into shapes that made other people feel bigger, but you are not a contortionist for someone else's ego. You're allowed to need softness. You're allowed to want understanding. You're allowed to ask for the kind of love that doesn't leave you walking on eggshells around someone who promised you the world, then handed you a war zone. Let them call you difficult. Let them say you're too much. Let them believe you walked away for nothing. Because the truth is, you walked away for everything. For your mind, your dignity, your ability to trust your own perception, and most of all, for the quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean fear. The kind of quiet that doesn't mean punishment. The kind of quiet that says, "You are safe now. You are home." And if he ever comes back with apologies, with nostalgia, with "I've changed," remember this: the man who punished you for feeling does not deserve access to the healed version of you. He does not get to watch you bloom after burying you. So let him go. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Let him die in your mind so that you can come back to life in your own. Because love without safety isn't love. It's captivity dressed in roses. And no matter how romantic the cage, a cage is still a cage. So don't wait for another argument. Don't wait for him to push just a little further. Don't wait for your spirit to go numb. Leave him the moment he teaches you that your pain is negotiable. And don't look back, because your healing doesn't live in his apology. It lives in your exit. If this resonated, if your body reacted before your mind did, then it wasn't just a video. It was a mirror. You saw yourself. You heard the things you weren't ready to say out loud, and now you can't unhear them. So sit with that. Let it burn, and then let it soften, because you are not alone, and you're not crazy. You were simply unheard for too long. If this helped you, speak up in the comments. If you know someone who needs it, send it. And if you need to hear more truths like this, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning of you coming home to yourself.